So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case, and before I even say anything else, I'm going to apologise again. I know you guys don't like it when I apologise all the time, but here we are. I know I haven't uploaded for 2 weeks, but if you follow me on Instagram you will know that I lost my voice last week, and that's like the only thing I need to make a YouTube video is my voice, and I didn't have that. So I'm really sorry about that. I feel like I apologise in every single video and I'm trying to cut it out, but I feel like that one warranted an apology because it's been a long time and I'm aware of that and I'm sorry. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about a solved case from the UK, and I feel like a lot of people my age, especially girls my age, will have heard of this person before. And you'll see why in a minute, but before we get into it, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So Helen Bailey was a 51-year-old author born on August 22nd, 1964 in Northumberland in England. From a very young age, Helen loved to write, but when she was younger in school, it was more like diary entries that she would write. As soon as she would get home from school every day, she would write in her diary, and it was kind of sad stuff because she didn't really have many friends. The other kids would kind of pick on her, they wouldn't really involve her in games. But eventually Helen would grow up and go on to study physiology at a London university, and her dream was to become a forensic scientist. Although once she started getting into that and studying it, she realised it wasn't really for her. And so instead she decided to get a career in the media, and she got a job in licensing and marketing with children's cartoon characters. And she worked with the likes of the Rugrats and Garfield and Nintendo characters. And then in 1996, when Helen was still working for this company where she would do all this licensing and marketing, they actually needed a secretary. They needed someone already in the company to fill that role temporarily. And so Helen decided to do that. She decided to become a secretary for a while, and that meant that she was speaking to new people in this firm. She was still working for the same company, but these were people that she didn't really cross paths with before in her old job. And one of these people that she met was a man named John Sinfield, who would eventually become her husband. The two of them moved in together in London, and John really admired Helen. He worshipped her. He thought she was so talented, so creative, so imaginative, and he saw so much potential in her. And he would encourage Helen to write stories because, like I said, she loved to write, but she never really found the time, and she didn't really have much confidence in her work until she met John. So Helen began writing, and between the years of 2008 and 2010, she published 5 very popular books in a series named The Crazy World of Electra Brown. She was nominated for a bunch of awards for these books, and that's why I say that a lot of people my age might have heard of her and know her, because I know we read those books in school, The Crazy World of Electra Brown and a couple of other series from Helen Bailey. All in all, Helen wrote 22 different books for these different series, and obviously it became her new career. She was really talented and she made a lot of money doing it. But then in 2011, Helen's life took a very tragic turn when she was on holiday in Barbados with her husband John. At this point, the couple had been together for 22 years and they were married for 15 of those, and they really brought out the best in each other. They were perfect for each other and they saw so much potential in each other. And then one day on this Barbados trip, they went to the beach, and John decided that he was going to go out into the ocean, and Helen said, okay, I'll meet you out there in a bit, but I'm just going to stay on the beach for a while. So after a while, Helen did whatever she was doing on the beach, and then she decided she was going to go and meet her husband in the sea. And as she did, as she was approaching the sea, she saw him out there struggling and flailing his arms and bobbing up and down. And so she alerted the lifeguards or whoever was on safety at the time, and they went out to get him, but unfortunately they were too late, and John Sinfield drowned to death in front of his wife Helen. So then Helen had to go about the rest of this Barbados trip for like a week or 2 weeks alone. And this was a trip that they'd planned together. It was a romantic getaway. It was supposed to be a bonding thing for the two of them. And now Helen had to do it all alone. Obviously his body was still over there. She needed to do paperwork and things like that. So she was stuck there alone. And then at the end of that holiday, she then had to bring home 2 suitcases, one full of her own things and then one full of her husband's things. And she had to take these 2 suitcases back to the home that they once shared, that they were going to start a family in. And I just can't imagine how traumatic that must have been. And Helen did really struggle with this loss, and so to deal with this grief, she decided to start up a blog. That's what she did best. She wrote about things. And so she started up this blog where she would write about her own experiences and other people could come and read that and talk about their experiences, and this blog was called Planet Grief. And alongside this blog, Helen also wrote a book, like a full book, about her experiences with grief and other people's experiences, and this book was named When Bad Things Happen in Good Bikinis. 7 months after the passing of her husband, Helen was still regularly updating this Planet Grief blog, and new people were finding it every single day. It was a very successful blog. And one of these people that found Helen's blog was a man around her age with 2 adult sons who had also recently lost his wife, and his name was Ian Stewart. And so Helen and Ian began talking about their own experiences, you know, helping each other out, and then they just started talking in general, just about their day, and then they started meeting up with each other, going for coffee, and then they started falling for each other. Eventually the 2 of them decided to move in together, although Ian didn't really want to live in London. He much preferred the countryside, and so the 2 of them moved to Royston in Hertfordshire. And there the 2 of them lived with Ian's 2 adult sons and Helen's dog Boris, which was actually once her and John's dog. And before long, Helen and Ian got engaged. And everything seemed to be just falling back into place for Helen after such a traumatic year. She was starting to be happy again. She had a family, she had a really nice home, her work was doing really well, she was friends with all the neighbours, she was really well liked. And then on April 15th, 2016, police received the following phone call.
Hello there. My partner has been missing since Monday.
What's your partner's name?
Helen Bailey. We've got a cottage, she's not there. And her phone is just dead. Just goes straight to answer machine.
And someone's been to the cottage and
Someone's been to the cottage, yeah. Her brother went there. She did take her dog with her. She's got a little dachshund. She has been very, very anxious and very worried about lots of things. She is a warrior. She's a natural warrior. She has talked about wanting space. Things just haven't been going well for her recently.
Can you sort of ask what sort of things you worry about, like personal things or financial things, or?
It can be just about anything.
So in that call, Ian said that Helen had been missing for almost a week at this point, which would normally be a long time to wait to report someone as missing, a whole week. But Helen had actually supposedly left a note at the house saying that she was going away for a while and she didn't want to be pestered or called or contacted. Helen had multiple different properties all over the UK, including one in Broadstairs in Kent, and she loved it there. And in this note, she said that she was going there for a while to focus on a new book. And so she didn't want anyone calling her, anyone contacting her, anyone coming to visit, and so people didn't. After a couple of days, Helen's brother started to get a little bit worried because she never did this. Like, sometimes she would distance herself a little bit, but she'd still keep in contact with her friends and family. She would never just ignore everyone for days at a time. And he began ringing and calling her after about 2 days, and he wasn't getting a single text back or any kind of acknowledgement at all. And so Helen's brother got in contact with Ian, her fiance, and just double checked, is she working on a book? Like, is this why she's ignoring me? Is she okay? And Ian said, yeah, she left a note, she's going to stay in Broadstairs in Kent for a while, I'm sure she's fine. But her brother didn't really like that. He wasn't fully satisfied with that explanation. And so he decided to go to this house in Kent, and he knocked on the door, but it was all locked up. There was no car in the driveway, there was no dog barking, there was no sign that Helen had been there at all. And so he went back home and told Ian that she wasn't there, and Ian reported her missing. And police searched and searched and searched, but there were no leads at all. There was no activity on any of her emails or her card or her phone. Like, there was nothing for them to follow at all, apart from this note. but obviously she wasn't at the house she said she was going to be at, so where did they go next? And so 11 days after Helen was last seen, police decided to go and talk to her fiancé Ian, just to make sure there wasn't anything going on in her life that meant she would want to go missing, or maybe she was suicidal, maybe something was going on. They need to check every possible outcome. But Ian couldn't really think of anything that might have been different about her life at this one point. He said she wasn't particularly stressed, she wasn't particularly sad, just the day that she went missing was just a normal day. It didn't seem as though Helen was preparing to run away before her disappearance, so it didn't seem as though it was off her own back that she was missing. It's not like she got out a large sum of money to run away with. It's not like she made any plans to get a flight or accommodation anywhere. She hadn't set up a new bank account or a new phone. And days turned into weeks, which turned into months without Helen. And all of her family and friends were regularly interviewed just in case circumstances changed, in case they remembered anything. And of course, police were searching areas locally. Her house that she shared with Ian and his sons was searched. They searched woods and fields and local homes. Police were even asking people that lived in the same area as Helen to double check their garages and their sheds in case she was there. Around the 6-week mark after Helen went missing, her fiancé Ian was visibly not doing well at all. He wasn't looking after himself, he wasn't keeping up with his hygiene, his beard was overgrown, his hair was overgrown, he seemed exhausted. People described him as seeming very lost and very empty. He was very spacey, he wasn't all there, but he was very grateful for everyone's attempts to find Helen. He was always hugging people, always thanking them for their searches. He would always go and talk to the police and the local people that would put out posters, although he wouldn't really join in these things himself because he was so exhausted. Meanwhile, in the police investigation, they were trying really hard to track Helen's phone, although this was going to be very hard because it was switched off. And so obviously it wasn't giving out any signals, it wasn't connecting to any towers. And so police decided to go down the route of checking her Wi-Fi just in case like her laptop or her phone had connected or something, and they found something. On the 16th of April, so 5 days after Helen went missing, her mobile phone automatically connected to the Wi-Fi at her Kent home, the place she said she was going to be in that note. So now police were thinking, well, maybe she's been there the whole time. Maybe just when her brother went to check the house, she just wasn't there. And so they went back to the property, they searched it, although there was no sign that she'd ever been there. And so they thought, well, maybe her phone just connected when she was driving past the house or walking past the house. And so this reignited the investigation. Police believed that Helen was out there. And so a reappeal was made, but this time more from the angle that she'd run away. The public was warned that maybe she'd be using a fake name or a fake ID because she doesn't want to be found or didn't seem to want to be found. Hotel staff, B&B staff, service station staff were all told to keep an eye out for her because she might be travelling, she might be on the go. A lot of posters were put up around Brighton and different things were put on the local news in Brighton because Helen was known to frequent going there. And so they thought maybe she'd run away to Brighton, maybe she was staying there and didn't want to be found. Meanwhile, police were continuing to look through her bank records and they found a huge lead. So Helen had her personal bank account set up so that every month £400 would go out of it and go into a different account. And ever since Helen disappeared, that amount had changed from £400 to £4,000. And this other account that £4,000 was now going into every month was her and Ian's joint account. Police also found a transaction that had happened since Helen went missing in her personal bank account to renew an Arsenal Football Club season ticket. And this wasn't in Helen's name, this was in Ian's name. And so obviously police found all of this bank activity very suspicious, and so they wanted to go and speak to Ian about it. So they went straight to his house as soon as they found it, but Ian wasn't there. So police spoke to all his friends, all his family, all his neighbours, and not many of them really knew where he was, apart from just a couple of them that said he'd gone on holiday alone during the search for his missing wife. But this wasn't just like a last minute getaway because obviously he seemed very exhausted, he seemed very lost and empty, he seemed like he needed a break. But this wasn't one that he'd just booked to go away for a weekend and refresh and come back. This was a 2-week holiday that had been booked for months in advance for him and Helen, for the two of them to go on. So he decided that rather than waste this holiday, he would go away in the middle of the search for his missing wife and do this 2-week holiday that they would have spent together alone. And at this point, suspicion was just building and building, and it didn't seem like normal behaviour when your wife goes missing. And so police decided to change this investigation to a murder inquiry. On July 11th, 2016, Ian returned from his 2-week holiday and police were straight at his door, not only to inform him of the switch to a murder inquiry, but also to arrest him on suspicion of the murder of his own wife. They had no body, they had no proof she'd been murdered, no proof she was even dead, but they felt that this was just far too suspicious for it not to be promising.
Okay, I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of Helen Bowen.
Joking.
So now that this was no longer a missing persons search and it was a murder inquiry, police had to go back and interview everyone all over again because that's just how it is. They ask different kinds of questions now. And once again they spoke to Helen's next door neighbour, who was quite an elderly woman, and she said she actually remembered something from the morning that Helen went missing that she hadn't told them before. She said that around 11 a.m. that morning she was just sat doing her taxes and whatever at the kitchen table when she heard a lot of banging, like a door slamming, but a very heavy door coming from Helen's house. And she heard this multiple times, and so she got up and decided to go to the window and see what it was, but as soon as she did, this noise stopped and it never happened again. And so she just carried on with her day. She didn't think much of it, just noisy neighbours. And of course police also re-interviewed Ian Stewart, and he gave them like a full rundown of everything he did that day. Just before 3 p.m, Ian left the house to go to a doctor's appointment, although this wasn't his original appointment time. He was actually booked in early in the morning that day. However, he called them up that morning and said that he was having car troubles and he wouldn't be able to make that appointment, so could they give him one a bit later, and they gave him a 3 p.m. one. And of course that GP that Ian saw that day was interviewed, and this GP said that he didn't really notice much out of the ordinary about Ian, but he did seem a little bit distant. And then after his doctor's appointment, Ian went to his local tip to go and drop off some rubbish, and I don't know what you call that in America, so I don't really know what to say. Just a place where you would take like large amounts of rubbish that you can't dispose in your own bins at home. Like you take it to this place and they'll dispose of it for you. And there, at that local tip, he discarded a double duvet. And then he got back into his car and then he went to Helen's solicitor's office to go and discuss this property that Helen had up in Newcastle. And the solicitor was again interviewed, and they said that he seemed quite aggressive. He was wanting to push through the sale of this property in Newcastle, but of course the solicitor said that he couldn't do that without Helen because everything was in her name. And he said that Helen was ill and she really wanted it doing, and so he had to do it for her. But of course they wouldn't let him. He then goes back home and Helen's not there, and that is when he finds the note. And then I don't know what he does for the rest of the day at home, but then at 9 p.m. he decided to go back out again, go and park his car in town and go and meet one of his sons. But this meeting with his son wasn't planned. His son didn't know that his dad was going to turn up that day. Ian knew that he played bowls at the same place at the same time every week. And so he just went to town to go and watch his son play bowls for an hour, and then he took him out for a Chinese. And that was all very spontaneous. It was then 2 days after Helen went missing that people started to notice she was missing. Of course, Ian knew this whole time, but like Helen's brother started getting in contact and stuff. And that was when Ian told him about this note, that she was in Kent. Her brother went and checked, but there was no car, there was no dog, there was no lights on. And so Helen's brother, while he was in Kent, he decided to go and speak to her neighbours and different shopkeepers, people that Helen knew there, and just ask if she'd been there, if they'd seen her walking the dog or whatever, and no one had seen her. None of her neighbours had heard any noise from this house. They had no idea that she'd been there, they didn't think she'd been there. And then after that, Ian waited 2 more days to report her missing, making it a total of 4. So she wasn't at the place where she said she was going to be, but everyone just kept texting her and calling her, hoping that she would pick up in that time, but of course she didn't. So then eventually after 4 days he did report her missing. That was the police call you heard earlier. And so police, as part of this investigation, decided to go back to that phone call and listen over it. And in this phone call, obviously Ian was asked a lot of questions, like about Helen's description, just general information about her, information that you would know about your partner that you'd been with for 5 years, but Ian struggled to answer these questions.
What's her date of birth?
Oh, crikey. God, she found me there.
What's her height initially?
Oh, I'm going to guess here. She has told me, but she's probably 5'10".
Hair colour and style?
It's on the shoulder, long. It's black going grey.
Eye colour?
Oh my God, how do you forget these things?
He also told the police on the phone about this note that Helen had left saying that she was going to Kent. Although he said he'd misplaced it, he didn't have access to it, so he couldn't read it properly. All he could do was summarise it, and no one has ever seen this note. So no one knows if this note ever actually existed. All he could ever do was give people like the general gist of this note. No one knows any proper quotes. Ian just said that he threw it away because he didn't think it was that big of a deal. He thought his wife was in Kent. Also, if you remember, he personally decided not to join in with any of the searches or do any public appeals or anything like that, even though that could help bring his wife back. But no one really thought too much of it because he seemed exhausted. He seemed in a really bad way at the time. So everyone was just like, that's fair enough. He's very distressed, he's exhausted. But now, looking back on it, police were starting to think, well, maybe he did all that on purpose so that he didn't say the wrong things. But he told police that he did do some searching of his own. He wasn't part of the official searches, but 4 days after she went missing, he decided to go and check that home in Kent himself because other people had done it, but he didn't trust other people. He wanted to do it himself. And it was on that day when Ian went to the house in Maidstone in Kent that the Wi-Fi connected to Helen's phone automatically, meaning that Ian probably had Helen's phone. So now that Helen was presumed dead because this was a murder inquiry, her will was pulled up, like to see where all of her different items, possessions were going. And immediately police found a clear motive as to why Ian would want to get rid of Helen. Every single thing, every single penny, every single possession, every single property that Helen owned would have gone to Ian. And she was a very wealthy woman. We are talking millions of pounds, not thousands. She had a lot, and Ian had a lot to gain. So anyway, back to the timeline. Helen has now been missing for 3 months. She is presumed dead. This is now a murder inquiry. Ian Stewart is arrested and he is the main suspect. And Ian is just not saying anything at all. He is not acting overly heartbroken or helpful or defensive. He's not saying, I'm not the killer, I didn't kill her, she's my wife, I love her. He's just staying quiet, probably so to not incriminate himself. But the UK law is that police can only hold people in custody, suspects, for 96 hours, which is 4 days. So they had 4 days to question him, and if at the end of that 4 days they couldn't get him to confess or find enough evidence to say that he did it, then they would have to let him go. So the officers were talking about potential ways they could find evidence against Ian, and one of them recalled him acting very strangely when they arrested him. And so they decided to go back to the body cam footage that police wear when they arrest someone so that everything's recorded.
The garage door's open. Something like the garage door's open.
Ian just kept talking about the garage, these garage doors. Why are the garage doors open? Who opened the garage doors? Are the garage doors open? Why is that his main focus when he is being arrested for his wife's murder? Is he questioning who opened the garage doors because he didn't want police to think it was him? Is there something in that garage that he is wanting to hide? So police at this point had been searching the grounds, the whole house, the whole garden, everywhere for 2 full days. And this was a huge house. Helen had a lot of land. She was very wealthy. It was a very nice big house. So it was taking them a while. They had forensics in, they had sniffer dogs, but it was going to take a while longer. And during this search, one of the officers began speaking to a next door neighbour, that same elderly woman that had heard all the banging, and she was asking them, like, what are they using all this equipment for? Because it's very loud and it was keeping her awake at night. They were using all this equipment up until midnight and she couldn't sleep, so she just wanted to know what they were actually doing. And this officer explained that they were draining a water tank on the property and there was nothing they could do about it. There was nothing they could do about the noise. They needed to drain it because something could come from it. And this neighbour was very understanding, and she even told them to check this other water tank that they might not have known about. It was a cesspit that was kept underneath the garage, and the officers didn't know that was there. Ian hadn't told them that existed. And as soon as they heard that there was a cesspit in the garage, it was an immediate red flag, because Ian had been so on edge about the garage and he hadn't told them it was there, so they knew they had to search it. A cesspit, if you don't know, I don't know if it's called that in America, but it's like a sewage tank or something. Some, like, older properties don't connect to the proper sewage system that we have, and so they have a cesspit where a lot of like human waste goes and then it gets emptied every now and again. So it's just a massive tank under the garage of decaying human waste, like all the things that come out of the toilet. It's gross. It's not a nice place to search. So police opened this garage, and as soon as they did, they saw a Jeep parked in there, and they asked Ian to move it out so that they could search this garage. And when he did, the car had been parked over the top of a manhole cover this whole time. And so police took this manhole cover off, and there was a cesspit underneath. And so police immediately began searching in this cesspit underneath the garage, and within just 2 hours of searching, Helen Bailey's body was recovered. But not only that, also the body of her dog Boris. So of course Helen's body was sent off for an autopsy so that her cause of death could be identified, and it was found to be suffocation. But the worst part about that ruling is that they can't actually determine how she was suffocated. So it could have been at the hands of her husband, and then she could have been thrown in this cesspit, or she could have been thrown in alive and suffocated in there. And just to add to that, they don't know how Boris died either, her dog. They don't know whether he was also thrown in alive or if Ian killed him before he threw him in. Helen's autopsy also revealed that she'd been drugged at the time of her murder with sleeping pills. Although these specific sleeping pills have to actually be prescribed to you by a doctor. You can't go and buy them over the counter. And Helen wasn't prescribed these drugs, so she'd definitely been drugged. Someone had given her them. And of course, the person that was prescribed these drugs from a GP was Ian Stewart. So way before this, when Helen was just missing, before her body was found, they'd looked at her internet search history to see if they could find any clues as to where she could be. And they found at the time that she'd Googled, "Why do I feel tired all the time?" And obviously at the time they didn't think much about that Google search. That wasn't going to tell them where she was or why she was missing. But now, looking at her autopsy, they found that Ian had actually been drugging her with these sleeping pills for months before her death. So now that Helen's body had been found and she definitely was murdered, police could charge Ian Stewart with her death. And he initially pleaded in his first court appearance. So when you're charged with murder, you have an initial court appearance to plead guilty or not guilty. And Ian pled not guilty, and so a proper trial was set for January of 2017. And during this trial, it actually came out that when Helen and Ian first bought this house together, Helen invited her brother round and she was showing him round, and she pointed out this cesspit in the garage, and she said that that would be a good place to hide a body. It was just a normal dark humour comment that she dropped, but she said that in front of Ian. And to me, that's one of the saddest and scariest parts about this, that she could have planted that seed in her husband's head. So when he eventually would murder her, he would do exactly what she said and hide the body there. Like, to me, that's so terrifying. So then, as part of his trial, Ian decided to take the stand himself in his own defence, which is never really a good idea. A lot of lawyers warn against that in murder trials, especially when you look this guilty. But Ian decided to go up there and tell a story that he had never told anyone before. Not police, not his family, not his friends. He said that right from the start, right from April 11th, 2016, when Helen went missing, he knew that she'd been kidnapped. Her and her dog Boris had been kidnapped by two men named Nick and Joe. He said he knew this the whole time, but he never went to police because he was scared that if he did, Helen would be in danger. And these two men, Nick and Joe, wanted £500,000 from him, like a ransom, and then they would give Helen back. And so Ian said that he went about trying to find that money. That's why he went to the solicitors and tried to push through the sale of that flat, and that's why he put all this money from Helen's account into their joint account. And then he said he spoke to Helen 4 days later on the 15th of April, so she was definitely alive then. Nick and Joe were keeping her alive. And he said that he spoke to her on the phone, on one of the men's phones. But everyone at this court hearing could just tell that this was such a lie, that Ian had made this up pretty much on the spot because he wasn't able to answer certain questions about Nick and Joe. And so the prosecution decided to present him with two men that they believed he had fabricated this whole story based on, like a real Nick and a real Joe from his life, that he had thought of them and then thought of this whole story about them but not about them. That makes absolutely no sense because this is such an insane story. So Ian knew two different men, a Nick and a Joe, from two different points in his life. One of them was a school friend and one of them was a neighbour, and the prosecution presented him with these two men and said, are these the two men then? Are these the two people that kidnapped your wife? And Ian admitted that he knew this Nick and this Joe that had been presented to him in court, but he said that they weren't the kidnappers. And the kidnappers were real, but they were a different Nick and a different Joe. So after a while, the prosecution were just sick of hearing this because it's so ridiculous and they had so much evidence against him. They called his version of events absurd, and they found Ian guilty of the murder of Helen Bailey, which we knew was going to happen. In February of 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 34 years. So at the very least, he will be 90 years old by the time he even gets his first parole hearing, and he probably won't even get let out on that parole hearing. It'll probably be denied. In August of just last year, so August of 2018, Ian was rearrested, so he's serving his prison time and whatever, but he was rearrested as they were looking into the death of his first wife. So if you remember, that is how he met Helen, because his wife passed away and he went to a grief blog, the one that Helen ran. His first wife was called Diane, and she actually died of complications with her epilepsy, or that's what they believed up until this point. But then Ian's second wife died and that was proved to be murder, so then they were like, oh, hang on a minute. His first wife died very sudden, very unexpectedly, and very strangely. So she'd always had problems with her epilepsy, but they'd never been so bad to the point where they could have killed her. But everyone didn't think too much of it at the time because she had epilepsy and it was plausible that she could have died from those complications. And after his first wife's death, he did receive a payout of $30,000 from her life insurance. So the same motive, this money motive, comes up again. And all of Ian's former friends, people that he'd known in his life, said that he was always very, very tight with money. He was always just obsessed with money and making more and saving more. For now, that's everything on this case. I don't know if they're still looking into the death of his first wife, Diane. Of course, I'll keep you updated if they are. I don't know if that's concluded or anything yet. As for today's charity shout out, I'm sorry I didn't do one in my last video. I just completely forgot. Obviously it's a very new thing in my videos and I'm so used to the way that I do this videos, I completely forgot. But here we are today, charity shout out. And today's charity is very, very similar to the last one we talked about, and I'm sorry about that, but I feel like I couldn't do any other type of charity on this kind of video, you know? So today we're going to be talking about Refuge, which is a charity for women and children against domestic violence. Refuge is actually a UK charity though this time. The Love is Greater Than Hate project, which was the last domestic violence charity, that one is based in America. This one is based in the UK. And they work with at least 6,000 people every single day. 6,000 women and children that are affected by domestic violence. They also work with victims of sexual violence, modern slavery, honour-based violence, human trafficking and genital mutilation. Refuge provides support in so many different ways, and we're going to talk about them all now. However, one of the main things that they have is a 24-hour hotline for you to ring anytime. That number is on screen right now if you need it. They provide emergency temporary accommodation for victims that might need to escape their situation then and there. They have support workers, financial and home planning for victims that are trying to escape or have just escaped a violent situation. They put on group sessions for women and children that are either going through it or have just come out of it and they're kind of struggling to make friends and they feel like they don't really have anyone. And these sessions help them to make connections and rebuild a life and get some kind of confidence back. They also do a lot of prevention work as well as working with victims. They also do a lot of campaigning to raise awareness about the different types of violence. They help trying to change laws. You can donate to Refuge monthly or you can give a single one-off donation. Of course, I'll leave the link in the description if you want to do so. Just £2 can help to put together an emergency pack for victims that escape situations with just the clothes on their back. So they arrive at Refuge and they've got nothing. They need a toothbrush, they need pads or tampons, they need deodorant. £10 can pay for 1 night stay in an emergency temporary accommodation for a woman and or her children. And of course, I don't expect you to donate all of this by yourself, but maybe collectively, if we can donate £75 between us, £75 can pay for a full support session for a victim who is either going through it and needs help trying to plan how they're going to get out of that, or maybe someone that's just gotten out of it and they need help getting back out into the world. They need financial help or help getting a job again. But yeah, the link to donate to Refuge will be down in the description box. I would really, really appreciate if you guys could go and donate, like even £1. If every single person watching this video could donate £1, imagine how much money we could raise. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. Please, if you have any other kind of charities that you want me to mention in these videos, or GoFundMes or anything like that, anything of the sort, leave it in the comment section and I will get round to them. I'm trying to remember to do these in every single video, but for some reason it keeps slipping my brain. I nearly forgot to do one again today, but I remembered. We're good. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, make sure you leave a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you want to see some more from me. That didn't sound like English, did it? If you want to see some more from me, subscribe. A big shout out to all of my channel members. All of their names are on screen right now. If you want to become a channel member, all you have to do is click the link in my description, or you can click the join button if you're on a desktop. If you do become a channel member, you get access to a bunch of extra perks. You get your name on this end screen of every single video. You'll also get access to a members only community tab where we talk about the cases. I'll ask for case suggestions, you'll get your suggestions fast tracked. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to my second channel if you haven't already. And yeah, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next one. Bye!